This video is going to be on Lori Daybell, aka Lori Vallow's sentencing memorandum for the conspiracy to murder Charles Vallow, as well as the conspiracy to murder Brandon Budro. Now, I also want to mention that Colby Ryan, Lori Vallow's son, is updating on his YouTube channel, but he did last week suffer from a mini stroke. So if you want to give him support, he has updates on his channel for that. And with that being said, let's get into the state's sentencing memorandum. On January 30th, 2019, Charles Vallow, Lori Vallow's husband at the time, called the Gilbert Police Department to report that the defendant believed he was Ed Schneider. And she said she was going to murder Ed Schneider and that she was going to destroy him. This was the beginning of Charles Vallow's nightmare from which he was never able to wake. On January 31st, 2019, Charles repeated his concerns to the Gilbert Police Department about the defendant's beliefs. Charles Vallow is recorded on body-worn camera video telling the police that the defendant threatened to murder him, that the defendant said that Charles was dark and she was calling him by someone else's name. Charles Vallow told the police that his wife believed she was a translated being and that she couldn't die. Charles explained to the Gilbert Police Department he was concerned for his children, that he did not know what she might do to them. Charles told the police that the defendant told him to come get the kids and she did not care what happened to them. Charles Vallow had sole custody of his son J.J. Vallow from the time this defendant disappeared in February 2019 until April of 2019, when the defendant came back into Charles's life. Charles invited the defendant and Tylee Ryan to live with JJ and him in Texas. When the defendant wanted to move back to Arizona, Charles rented a house in Chandler, Arizona for the defendant. Charles moved the defendant, JJ and Tylee, into the location at the end of June 2019. Charles remained living in Texas. On July 9, 2019, Charles Vallow booked Adam Cox a flight to Arizona to help him with an intervention to try to get Lori Vallow back into the traditional LDS beliefs. A few minutes after Charles booked his flight, Adam Cox called his brother Alex Cox and let him know he would be in town on the 10th and wanted to stay with him. The evening of July 9th, 2019, Lori Vallow told her brother Alex Cox, "It's all coming to a head this week. I will be like Nephi, I am told, and so will you." After this text, the defendant and Alex Cox spoke on the phone for 56 minutes. The evening of July 10th, Alex Cox drove to the defendant's home with a gun and spent the night at the defendant's house. On July 11th, 2019, Lori Vallow's threats to kill Charles Vallow came true. Charles Vallow came to the house he rented for Lori Vallow to pick up his son JJ and take him to school. As Charles arrived, he saw Alex Cox's trucks and he knew that Lori Vallow and her brother were planning something. This defendant allowed Charles to put JJ into the rental car, then she took Charles's cell phone and refused to return it. Lori Vallow was able to keep Charles inside the house by refusing to give him back his cell phone. No matter how many times Charles demanded the defendant hand over his cell phone, the defendant would not give it back to him and instead walked around the house with his phone. As this defendant was holding onto Charles's cell phone, Alex Cox came out with his gun. Alex Cox shot Charles once in the chest, causing Charles to fall to the floor. As Charles lay on the floor, Alex Cox shot him a second time in the abdomen. Lori Vallow left the scene in Charles Vallow's rental car while Alex Cox stayed at the house and staged the scene. This defendant and Alex Cox waited approximately 47 minutes before calling 911. Later, the defendant and her brother went through Charles Vallow's cell phone before giving it to the police. The day after Lori Vallow and Alex Cox killed Charles Vallow, Lori Vallow texted Charles Vallow's sons from prior marriage and told them, "Hi, boys. I have very sad news. Your dad passed away yesterday. I'm working on making arrangements and I'll keep you informed with what's going on. I'm still not sure how to handle things. Just want you to know that I love you, and so did your dad." The defendant's text message to Charles Vallow's sons was not only distressing to them, but was also devastating. Although the defendant said she would keep them informed of what's going on, when Charles Vallow's son asked what happened, the defendant responded, "We are still waiting for the ME report. I'll let you know more when I can." Charles Vallow's sons repeatedly texted this defendant asking her what happened to their father and for information about the funeral. This defendant would not tell Charles's sons what happened or provide any real information. When she did respond, the defendant acted like she did not know how Charles died. She is just terrible, a terrible person. Eventually, one of Charles's sons reached out to their aunt, Kay Woodcock, about the text message from Lori Vallow saying their dad was dead. Kay Woodcock also had no idea that her brother, Charles Vallow, was dead. Kay and her husband, Larry, were able to verify that Charles was shot and killed by Alex Cox after they Googled his name. Kay Woodcock then had to tell her brother's sons that their dad had been shot and killed by their uncle Alex. On July 15, 2019, the defendant called Banner Life Insurance Company, claiming to be the beneficiary of Charles Vallow's $1 million life insurance policy. On July 18, 2019, the defendant learned that Charles Vallow had changed the beneficiary to his life insurance policy. On July 18, 2019, this defendant messaged her soon-to-be husband, Chad Daybell, and said, "So I talked to the insurance company. He changed it in March, so it was probably Ned before we got rid of him." Lori Vallow moved to Rexburg, Idaho in August 2019 to be closer to Chad Daybell. Lori Vallow could have allowed JJ Vallow to go live with Kay Woodcock, but instead, she brought JJ and Tylee with her to Idaho. Alex Cox also moved to Rexburg, Idaho in August of 2019. Tylee Ryan was last seen alive September 8, 2019 in a photograph from Yellowstone National Park. JJ Vallow was last seen alive on September 23, 2019 in a video outside the defendant's apartment. The same day that JJ was last seen, Alex Cox began searching for places to practice shooting near Rexburg and for places to tint windows of Lori Vallow Daybell's Jeep Wrangler. On September 25, 2019, this defendant allowed Alex Cox to take her Jeep Wrangler to Dan's Window Tinting in Rexburg, Idaho, and spend $200 to tint the windows so no one could see into the rear of the Jeep. Later that day, Lori Vallow and Alex Cox went to Walmart store in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and purchased a track phone for Alex Cox to use for the next murder. Alex Cox activated the Idaho Falls Walmart track phone on September 26, 2019. On September 26, 2019, Brandon Budro took custody of his children so his soon-to-be ex-wife, Melanie Budro Pulowski, could fly to Rexburg, Idaho. Melanie Budro Pulowski was the only person who knew Brandon's new address and was in contact with this defendant and Alex Cox. And remember, everyone is still waiting to see if Melanie gets charged. We were told in court it's an active investigation. Melanie Budro Pulowski returned to Arizona on Sunday, September 29, 2019. On September 30th, 2019, this defendant Googled how to get the back seat out of my Jeep Wrangler, watched a YouTube video on how to remove the rear seat of a Jeep Wrangler. This defendant also took custody of Alex Cox's Verizon cell phone that was subscribed to him and began acting as his alibi so Alex Cox could drive to Gilbert, Arizona to shoot and kill Brandon Budro. Alex Cox left from Rexburg, Idaho in the evening of September 30th, 2019 with the Idaho Falls Walmart track phone. This defendant's Jeep Wrangler was seen on a DEA license plate reader in Arizona on October 1st, 2019. The rear tire had been removed from the Jeep. On October 1st, 2019, Alex Cox used his Gmail account to search for an address in Mesa, Arizona, and to search for direction to Brandon Budro's rental house. While Alex Cox was preparing to commit the murder of Brandon Budro in Gilbert, Arizona, this defendant rented a storage unit in Rexburg, Idaho to store the rear seat and tire from her Jeep Wrangler. Video from the storage unit shows Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell putting the tire and rear seat into the storage unit on October 2nd, 2019. On the morning of October 2nd, 2019, this defendant attempted to provide a fabricated alibi for Alex Cox. This defendant used Alex Cox's Verizon cell phone to call her cell phone. Both phones were using the same cell towers in Rexburg, Idaho. This call was at 8:02 a.m. Arizona time and lasted approximately 24 minutes. Meanwhile, the Idaho Falls Walmart track phone was utilizing cell towers around Melanie Budro Pulowski's rental house in Gilbert, Arizona, before utilizing cell towers in the area of Brandon Budro's rental property. On the morning of October 2nd, 2019, the Idaho Falls Walmart track phone and Lori Vallow's Jeep were outside Brandon's house for more than an hour, waiting for Brandon to return home. Brandon Budro returned to his rental house at approximately 9:13 a.m. on October 2nd, 2019. Brandon immediately saw a Jeep Wrangler with no rear tire and a Texas license plate next to his driveway. As Brandon was slowing down, he saw the rear window lift up, a rifle barrel appear, and then he heard a bang. His window shattered. This defendant's co-conspirator, Alex Cox, missed, killing Brandon Budro by a couple of inches. Brandon Budro drove off and eventually returned to his rental property. Alex Cox drove off and took back roads to return to Rexburg, Idaho. On October 3rd, 2019, Lori Vallow and Alex Cox went to the defendant's storage unit and removed the tire and rear seat for the defendant's Jeep Wrangler and put them back on the defendant's Jeep. Tammy Daybell was killed just over a little 2 weeks later on October 19, 2019. Chad Daybell was the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. Tammy Daybell's death was later ruled a homicide. On November 5th, 2019, this defendant married Chad Daybell in Kauai, I'm going to mispronounce that, Hawaii, on February 20th, 2020. This defendant was arrested there and brought back to Idaho. Tylee and JJ's remains were discovered on June 9th, 2020 on Chad Daybell's property. Tylee Ryan's remains had been dismembered and burned. JJ Vallow's body was duct taped and buried in plastic bags. On May 12, 2023, Lori Vallow was found guilty of multiple counts to include the murder of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell in the District Court of 17th Judicial District in the state of Idaho, and in and for the county of Fremont, in case number, all of that. On July 31st, 2023, Lori Vallow was sentenced to multiple counts of life without the possibility of parole. On April 22nd, 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Charles Vallow in Maricopa County. On June 12, 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Brandon Budro in Maricopa County. And here we have the aggravating factors. The court may consider statutory aggravating factor as a dangerous offense involving a deadly weapon. We knew that. The court can consider the statutory aggravating factor the defendant committed this offense as consideration for the receipt or an expectation of the receipt of anything of value. In this case, the defendant conspired with Alex Cox to kill Charles Vallow on July 11, 2019. The defendant called Banner Life Insurance on July 15, 2019 because she believed she was the beneficiary of Charles Vallow's $1 million life insurance policy. On July 18, 2019, the defendant learned she was not the beneficiary to the $1 million life insurance policy. The defendant texted Chad Daybell and said, "It's a spear through my heart." This defendant then texted Chad Daybell that she would still get $4,000 a month from Social Security because of murdering Charles Vallow. When the defendant later learned that Charles Vallow made his sister Kay Woodcock the beneficiary, the defendant confronted her about the money. It is clear from the defendant's actions and words that one of the motives for killing Charles Vallow was for money. I'm just going to put that there. Value, earnings. I'm not sure. I can't pronounce it, and I'm not going to butcher it anymore. The court can also consider statutory aggravating factor. This offense involved the presence of accomplice, Alexander Cox. We knew that. The defendant knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily waived her right to a jury trial on this aggravating factor and admitted that this existed. She did. The court may consider a statutory aggravating factor that Charles Vallow's family suffered emotional and financial harm, which, of course, yeah. Nonetheless, to give the appropriate weight to this aggravating factor, the court will hear from the victims at the time of sentencing about the long journey they have endured finally to get justice for the death of Charles Vallow. So Lori waived it, and I wonder if part of it was because she thought she wouldn't have to listen to the family. This might be the next filing I end up covering, because I suspect after seeing this, Lori is going to try to not have to hear victim impact statements. In one way or another, she has been trying to avoid hearing about what she is without all of the, I don't want to say niceties, but they had to hide things, right? Now they can be open about everything she's done, and I don't think she wants to sit and hear it. So we'll see how she handles that, but they are saying here that they are going to hear from the victims. I'm so glad we are. The court may consider a statutory aggravating factor that the defendant was previously convicted of a felony within 10 years immediately preceding the date of this offense. In this case, the defendant was found guilty on May 12, 2023 and sentenced on July 31st, 2023 for the murders of Tylee, Ryan, JJ, Vallow, and Tammy Daybell, and for the theft of Social Security money that she continued to collect after the murder of Tylee, Ryan, and JJ Vallow. This conviction is from Idaho. And then we have another aggravating factor. This is for Brandon. So this is for deadly weapon. And this is for accomplice, financial harm. Let's take a look at this. Brandon Budro testified at trial about the fear he experienced his day of shooting. Well, for emotional financial harm. The fear, the court, some bits and pieces on the ongoing trauma that Brandon experienced when he realized that Tammy Daybell is also under unusual circumstances and was fear. See, there's kind of a typo here. Brandon experienced that when he realized that Tammy Daybell had also under unusual circumstances. So I'm reading ahead a little bit when there's a typo like that. It catches me up. And he was feared for his life and fear of his children. Honestly, him being afraid for the life of his children makes a lot of sense. Brandon Budro knew that this defendant and her brother were responsible for the death of Charles Vallow and possibly Tammy Daybell. He was so afraid that Alex Cox and Melanie Budro-Pulowski would return to finish the job that he took his children and went into hiding. While in hiding, Alex Cox and Melanie Budro showed up at a friend's residence and at his parents' home looking for him and their children. Brandon continued to be afraid for his life until this defendant and her husband were taken into custody. This defendant caused Brandon Budro to suffer emotional harm, and not just the day of the shooting, but for months after. And this is for the previous 10 years. Recommendation. We're at the recommendation already. Sentence for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, a Class 1 dangerous felony, is life with the possibility of release for 25 years. The court may run the sentences concurrently or consecutively to each other. The court can also run the sentences concurrently or consecutively to the defense convictions in the District of Idaho. Both conspiracy to commit first-degree murder cases have multiple statutory aggravating factors. Each case has its own victims. Each case is caused and continues to cause irreparable emotional harm to the victims and their families. The state respectfully requests that this court run the cases consecutively to Idaho and run both of the Arizona cases consecutively. Wow, okay. So they're asking, when she's done with all of her Idaho cases, which are multiple lifetimes, then she can do individual lifetimes. Now, with all that said, I want to ask you something here. Doesn't this read like Melanie's going to be sooner than later appearing in court? Doesn't it read that way to you? I mean, I think everyone's been expecting that since the trial. I think we might get it after the sentencing. I wonder if she's in hiding or getting her affairs in order, to be honest. I'm gonna schedule this one, so there probably won't be a live chat because I'm recording this late at night when I found out about it. I am still powering through the Donkey Kong stuff on my other channel, and I have literally gotten like maybe a third of done. Like there's like so much to do. But I am, as I said, still following all the same cases, checking all the dockets, checking all the reporters, trying to find anything I can. And I came across this and I wanted to update you. And Friday is the actual sentencing date for this, as long as Lori doesn't delay it with something. I mean, who knows at this point with Lori? She might be like, I can't go to court. I have hemorrhoids. No one knows what she's going to do. So if that gets delayed, I'll post about it in the community post, or maybe I'll probably, come on, if she says that, I'm going to make a video. I'm going to make a long video making fun of it. So everyone's waiting for that sentencing. And then she's kind of put to bed unless she gets a new trial, which I hope she doesn't get. And then we can look for another case to cover as a main case. I have been, it seems like every case I start to like look into recently, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, I look into them and then they've been pleading guilty more. So We'll see. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. I still remember all of your previous ideas. I still have the ideas saved on like my desktop so I don't forget them. I just haven't had the chance to really dig in like I would like to.